Welcome, distinguished panelists. Today we delve into the complexities of the French invasion of Russia, a campaign that continues to fascinate and teach. Let us begin by exploring the layers of this historical event, each from our own unique perspectives.
The importance of understanding Napoleon's march into Russia through a traditional military lens cannot be overstated. Warfare strategies, at their core, often repeat through history.
While I respect the importance of historical strategies, Jacob, it's crucial to highlight the innovations Napoleon introduced. His approach wasn't just about strategy, but also about redefining warfare.
Both perspectives offer insight, but we must not overlook the geopolitical ambitions that drove Napoleon. His objectives weren't merely military. They were deeply entwined with a broader vision for Europe. Honor and conquest have driven many leaders throughout history, including in my homeland, Japan. Napoleon's motivations bear similarities to those of samurai-led campaigns, where honor played a crucial role alongside strategic objectives.
Understanding the motivations is vital, yet one must question the overambition that led to the logistical nightmares. Maintaining supply lines, a basic tenet of war, was disastrously overlooked.
Archie, I'd argue that Napoleon did understand logistics. His methods were innovative, albeit risky. The tragedy was not in the plan, but in the execution and the unforeseen variables.
And those variables, including the harsh Russian winter, defined the campaign. The inability to adapt swiftly turned a strategic gamble into a catastrophe.
Indeed, Nadia. The failure to account for such harsh conditions showcases a critical oversight in planning. However, let's not simplify these outcomes to mere miscalculations. The Russian response played a significant role.
True. The Russian strategy of scorched earth and guerrilla tactics displayed a deep understanding of their environment and how to use it against the invader, akin to the strategies used by ancient warriors in Japan.
An astute observation, Katsuro. The scorched earth policy might have been seen as barbaric or desperate, but from a military standpoint, it was effective and strategically sound.
Which brings us to the matter of evolving warfare. The tactics and strategies we discuss, from scorched earth to logistical innovations, highlight the adaptability required in military leadership.
This discussion sets the stage for a comprehensive examination of the French invasion of Russia. Our diverse perspectives only enrich the analysis. Shall we proceed to explore Napoleon's strategic objectives in greater detail? Let's delve into Napoleon's strategic objectives for invading Russia. Jacob, what are your thoughts on his motivations?
Napoleon's ambitions were clear. He sought to extend the French Empire and secure his dominance over Europe. By invading Russia, he aimed to force Tsar Alexander back into the continental system, weakening British economic power.
While Jacob's point on the continental system is valid, it's crucial to highlight Napoleon's attempt to innovate military strategy with the invasion. His goal wasn't just geopolitical, but also a profound shift in how wars were fought, focusing on rapid movements and decisive battles.
Bill, you're touching on an important aspect, innovation. But it's the broader geopolitical ambitions that drove Napoleon. He saw Russia as a key to not just defeating Britain economically, but also establishing an unparalleled sphere of influence. His ambition was not just about land, but reshaping the political landscape. It's fascinating, Nadia. From a Japanese perspective, we see Napoleon's hunger for honor and conquest as driving forces. These motivations resonate with the samurai code of Bushido. However, honor and conquest can often blind leaders to the practical realities of their ambitions.
I appreciate the insights, Katsuro, but comparing Bushido to Napoleon's motivations might be stretching it. Napoleon's objectives were rooted in European power dynamics and the intricacies of continental strategy rather than a code of honor.
Actually, Jacob, Katsuro's comparison isn't far off. Napoleon did share a certain warrior ethos, pushing for glory and believing in the superiority of his Grande Armée. However, his overestimation of this ethos against practical military logistics and Russian resilience was his downfall.
Napoleon's innovation, which Bill praises, was his undoing. The traditional value of keeping supply lines short and managing them effectively was ignored by Napoleon, leading to disastrous results. The emphasis on speed and aggression failed without the logistical support to sustain it.
Archie makes a critical point on logistics, undermining the supposed innovation. Furthermore, Napoleon's geopolitical ambitions blinded him to the cultural and environmental challenges of invading Russia. His underestimation of Russian resilience and tactics reflects a failure to appreciate the complexity of such an enormous undertaking.
And yet, his strategic objectives have informed modern military strategy. In ambition, yes, but also in the understanding of its limitations. There's honor in ambition and also in recognizing its bounds.
A compelling discussion. It's clear Napoleon's strategic objectives were multifaceted, encompassing innovation, geopolitical ambitions, and perhaps overreaching honor. Each perspective sheds light on the complex tapestry of motivations and consequences. Let's delve into the critical aspect of logistics and supply lines in Napoleon's campaign. Archie, your thoughts on the traditional approach to logistics in this context?
The axiom that an army marches on its stomach couldn't be more apt here. Napoleon, for all his strategic genius, stretched his supply lines to breaking points in Russia. A classic blunder, emphasizing the age-old wisdom of keeping supply lines secure and short.
While I don't dispute the importance of secure supply lines, Archie, Napoleon was no fool. He was innovating, attempting to live off the land, to move quickly without the cumbersome baggage trains of older military campaigns. It was a risk, yes, but it speaks to a modern understanding of mobility and flexibility in warfare.
Bill makes an interesting point about innovation. Yet the sheer failure of this strategy due to Russia's scorched earth policy and the logistical nightmares that ensued cannot be overlooked. It paints a vivid picture of the modern military adage, logistics is just as critical as strategy.
Nadia, the scorched earth policy only further solidifies the point that traditional supply lines are indispensable. Without them, you're inviting disaster.
But doesn't that mindset limit us, Archie? Look, the failure was not in the innovation, but in the underestimation of the Russian response. Imagine a scenario where supply lines are not just about stocks and carts, but about adaptability and quick seizure of resources.
That sounds great in theory, Bill, but the Russian winter and Napoleon's hubris turned that innovation into a catastrophe. There's a lesson in humility there, knowing the limits of your strategy and logistics.
Respectfully, the conversation here underscores a crucial aspect often overlooked: adaptation to nature and respect for the environment you're operating in. In Japan, understanding and using the terrain to one's advantage is paramount. Napoleon's failure also lay in his underestimation of the Russian terrain and winter, not just its army or tactics.
Katsuro brings up an excellent point about environmental factors. Still, without a solid supply line, the best knowledge of terrain and weather amounts to little. The failure was multifaceted, indeed.
Let's not forget, this campaign, despite its failings, laid the groundwork for future military logistics thinking. The idea of speed and flexibility in sustaining an army was ahead of its time. The execution was flawed, severely so, but the concept sparked change.
True, Bill. It's a testament to the saying that sometimes you more from failure than from success. Napoleon's disaster in Russia serves as a perfect case study in logistics, innovation, and adaptation, or the lack thereof.
It seems we all agree on the critical role of logistics and the balance needed between traditional methods and innovative strategies. Understanding and adjusting to environmental conditions and ensuring flexibility without compromising the supply essentials form the cornerstone of military logistics. Moving on, let's explore the influence of weather and terrain on the French invasion of Russia. Bill, your perspective on modern warfare here is invaluable.
All right, the key point we must acknowledge is how Napoleon underestimated the role of weather. Modern warfare tries to minimize its impact, but back then, his failure to plan for the Russian winter was a fatal oversight.
Bill, while your point stands, it's critical to emphasize traditional warfare's inherent dependency on favorable conditions. Napoleon, as much as he innovated, couldn't escape the reality that weather and terrain are unpredictable, but always decisive factors in warfare.
I must agree with Jacob here. In samurai culture, we learn to respect and adapt to nature. Napoleon's lack of adaptation was not just a tactical failure, it was a failure to understand the environment as an opponent in itself.
Respect to nature aside, Katsuro, the innovation in warfare I advocate for, is about anticipating and mitigating such natural impacts. The technology wasn't there in 1812, but the principle of adaptability should have been.
Adaptability is a modern concept, yes, but let's not forget the psychological aspect. An army confronted with the vast Russian landscape and extreme weather faces challenges beyond physical. Napoleon's men were not mentally prepared for what they encountered, which speaks volumes about the necessity of logistics, flexibility, and morale.
Nadia makes an excellent point. Logistics and morale aside, the length of supply lines back then fundamentally dictated the success of military campaigns. The French supply lines were overstretched, vulnerable, and could not support operations in such a vast terrain, compounded by severe weather conditions.
And that's where I'll push back, Archie. Risky and innovative strategies have their place, but they need to be supported by solid logistics. Napoleon tried to innovate, but left his supply lines as an afterthought, a clear oversight in planning.
Indeed, the planning was flawed, but this discussion underscores the critical need to adapt to and respect terrain and climate in warfare. Samurai or not, the philosophy of understanding one's battlefield remains constant.
I'll concede the point on adaptation, Katsuro. However, let's not downplay the sheer hubris at play. An understanding of terrain and weather, combined with historical precedent, should have informed better strategic decisions.
Ultimately, this segment of history is a stark reminder of logistics, moral, and environmental considerations in campaign planning. Each aspect, heavily affected by weather and terrain, was mishandled during the invasion, leading to disastrous outcomes.
Thank you, everyone. This has been a robust discussion. Weather and terrain played pivotal roles in the campaign's failure, compounded by oversight and underestimation. The consequences of these miscalculations have clearly been felt throughout history. Let's delve into the impact of the Russian scorched earth policy on Napoleon's Grande Armée. This strategy, while brutal, played a crucial role in the campaign's outcome. Nadia, could you lead us into this discussion with your perspective on its psychological impact?
Absolutely. The scorched earth policy wasn't just about depriving the Grande Armée of resources, it was a psychological warfare tactic. Imagine marching into a land you expect to plunder, only to find it burned to ashes. It's demoralizing. This, coupled with the harsh weather, amplified the sense of isolation and desperation among French troops.
While I see your point about psychological impacts, Nadia, we cannot ignore the military genius behind such a desperate yet effective measure. It's a testament to the lengths to which a defending force will go to protect its homeland. This tactic drastically limited Napoleon's options for sustenance and put his troops in dire straits. It was, from a strictly military viewpoint, a sound strategic move.
Sound, but at a tremendous cost, Archie. The policy left Russian peasants homeless and without food. Yes, it was strategically effective against Napoleon, but at what human cost? We must weigh the military effectiveness against the moral implications.
Jacob raises an interesting point about morality, but let's not forget that warfare itself is a realm where conventional morality is often suspended. The Russian command made a calculated decision that enduring this self-inflicted wound would ultimately lead to their victory. It's the kind of innovation in strategy that has lessons for modern warfare as well.
Bill, while your point on innovation is valid, we should also consider the samurai's perspective on honor in warfare. Destruction of one's own property and land as a tactic seems dishonorable by those standards. Yet, in the broader strategy of war, sacrificing the present for the future victory is a form of honor itself. It's a complex issue.
Katsuro, that's an intriguing cross-cultural perspective, and it underlines that the effectiveness of such a strategy can't be boiled down to a simple moral judgment. It's about survival, about adaptation. The Russian army showed remarkable adaptability, essentially rewriting the rules of engagement.
Adaptability at great cost, Nadia. This strategy should not be glamorized. It brought unimaginable suffering to the civilian population. The military effectiveness is undeniable, but we must not overlook the human tragedy that accompanied it.
Archie, I respect your point, yet it's critical to understand that in the calculus of war, especially one on the scale of the Napoleonic Wars, such drastic measures are sometimes seen as the only way to ensure a nation's survival. It's a grim reminder of the stakes involved.
True, Bill. War forces leaders to make decisions that are unthinkable in peacetime. The scorched earth policy, as extreme as it was, essentially saved Russia from conquest. It's a stark example of how far a nation will go to protect its sovereignty.
This discussion underscores the multifaceted impacts of the scorched earth policy: strategic genius, psychological warfare, moral dilemmas, and the severe costs to both soldiers and civilians. Each viewpoint here highlights the complexity of warfare and the difficult choices faced by those in command. Thank you all for a robust discussion. Let's move on to the role and impact of guerrilla warfare conducted by Russian partisans. Let's delve into the role and impact of guerrilla warfare conducted by Russian partisans during the campaign. Bill, can you start us off with your perspective on the effectiveness of these tactics?
Absolutely. The ingenuity of Russian partisans adopting guerrilla tactics against Napoleon's Grande Armée was a game changer. It showcased early instances where a smaller, less equipped force could significantly hinder a traditional army's progress. The psychological impact on Napoleon's troops, constantly under the threat of ambush, cannot be overstated.
Bill makes an excellent point about the psychological impact. Warfare isn't solely about the physical confrontation, but also the mental and emotional toll it takes on soldiers. The unpredictability and fear induced by guerrilla tactics contributed to demoralization and exhaustion among French troops, an aspect often underestimated in discussions about military strategy.
Indeed, Nadia. The psychological warfare aspect resonates with the principle of using the enemy's mind against them, much like the strategies employed by the shadow warriors or ninjas of Japan. However, the Russian partisans' success wasn't just psychological, but also significantly disrupted Napoleon's supply lines. This blend of physical and psychological tactics exemplifies the depth of guerrilla warfare's effectiveness.
While the points made are valid, we must not romanticize guerrilla warfare without considering its limitations and the context in which it was used. Disruptive, yes, but it's a technique born out of desperation when facing a superior force. The Russian partisans succeeded partly because of the unique geographical and societal landscape of Russia, not something easily replicated.
Archie, while it's true that guerrilla warfare has its limitations, its effectiveness in this context should not be underestimated. It played a crucial role in extending the logistical nightmares Napoleon was already facing. The hit-and-run tactics, though small in scale, cumulatively had a profound impact on the Grande Armée.
And let's not overlook the fact that these tactics sowed seeds of paranoia within French ranks. Soldiers feared attack not just from the Russian army, but also from an unseen enemy blending with civilians. It's a testament to the guerrilla warfare's efficacy in leveraging the occupier's vulnerabilities, isolation, and unfamiliar terrain.
The strategic application of these tactics aligns with Sun Tzu's teachings: to strike where the enemy least expects and to use one's strengths against the enemy's weaknesses. The Russian partisans, familiar with their homeland, utilized their knowledge and unconventional warfare to great effect.
The effectiveness of guerrilla warfare aside, one must remember that Napoleon's failure was multifaceted. Guerrilla tactics alone did not define the campaign's outcome, but contributed to the compounded adversities faced by the Grande Armée.
A compelling discussion. It's clear that guerrilla warfare, while a component of the larger struggle, significantly influenced the dynamics of the French invasion. Its psychological impact and disruption of conventional military operations illustrate the depth and complexity of warfare. Thank you for your insights. Let's move on to our next topic. Let's delve into the tactics and impact of the Battle of Borodino. Jacob, your thoughts on the military strategies employed?
The Battle of Borodino was a showcase of Napoleon's reliance on direct, aggressive tactics. However, the Russian forces, under Kutuzov's command, were well entrenched and prepared. The frontal assaults led to massive casualties on both sides, which was a harrowing testament to the era's warfare tactics. It's a classic example of the cost of underestimating your opponent's resilience.
I agree with your analysis of Napoleon's tactical approach, Jacob, but let's not overlook the psychological aspect. The high casualties at Borodino had a profound impact on the morale of Napoleon's Grande Armée. The realization that victory wasn't assured, despite reaching the gates of Moscow, likely sowed seeds of doubt among his troops.
While the psychological impact is noteworthy, the sheer numerical aspect of casualties cannot be ignored. Both armies suffered greatly, but the Russians could retreat and regroup, thanks to their scorched earth strategy and knowledge of the terrain. This battle illustrates the futility of aggressive tactics without substantial logistical support and local knowledge.
Archie, you hit an important point about logistics. However, I'd argue that Borodino also highlighted Napoleon's adaptability on the battlefield. Despite the challenges, he managed to reposition his forces effectively throughout the day. The issue wasn't with tactics, but with strategic planning and overextension of his supply lines.
It's interesting, Bill, how you mention adaptability. From a samurai perspective, adaptability isn't just tactical, but also strategic. Honor and duty to one's cause are paramount, but so is the wisdom to know when a battle, even if won, could lead to a greater loss in the war. Kutuzov understood this, retreating to preserve his forces. Katsuro, your point on strategic adaptability is crucial. The Battle of Borodino was, in essence, a Pyrrhic victory for Napoleon. Yes, he claimed the battlefield, but at what cost? His army was a shadow of its former self, ill-prepared for the Russian winter ahead. This speaks volumes about the importance of long-term strategic thinking over short-term tactical successes.
While we acknowledge the long-term consequences, let's not forget the immediate after-effects. The path to Moscow was clear, yet the expected Russian capitulation didn't happen. This battle, significant as it was, didn't deliver the decisive blow Napoleon hoped for, which fundamentally altered the campaign's outcome.
Precisely, Jacob. And the decision to march on Moscow after such a costly battle, rather than regroup and reassess, was a critical error. Leadership requires not just courage, but also the prudence to recognize when to advance and when to hold. Napoleon's hubris, in this case, was his downfall.
Yet, we must appreciate the complexity of the decisions leaders faced at the time. The fog of war, both literal and metaphorical, obscures the clarity we now have in hindsight. It's a poignant reminder of the burdens commanders carry.
A compelling discussion that reveals the multifaceted nature of Borodino, its tactical depth, strategic consequences, psychological impacts, and the lingering shadow it casts on military leadership. Each of you has brought invaluable insights into understanding this pivotal moment in history. Moving on to the psychological and moral effects of the campaign on both the Grande Armée and the Russian army. Katsuro, will you start us off with how honor and duty might have influenced the soldier's psychology?
Certainly. In examining the samurai culture, honor and duty are paramount, and these principles heavily influence the mindset of the soldiers. While the contexts are vastly different, the Grande Armée, driven by Napoleon's ambitions, would have felt a strong sense of duty. The harsh conditions and failures they faced would test this resolve, impacting their morale deeply.
I see your point, Katsuro, and it's valid. However, we also must consider the modern concept of psychological trauma, what we now term PTSD. The relentless stress, the witnessing of mass casualties, and the guilt of survival would wreak havoc on the soldier's psychological state, far beyond a simple test of honor and duty.
Nadia makes an excellent point. Adding to that, the remarkable stories of individual heroism emerging in such circumstances do illustrate incredible morale among troops against overwhelming odds. Yet the very catalyst for these acts can be the dire psychological strain and desperation, a profound moral and mental cost.
While the observations on psychological effects are insightful, one must not overlook the basic military discipline and the role of leadership in maintaining morale. The failures of the campaign, strategic blunders, and retreat from Moscow would have severely disrupted the moral fabric of the Grande Armée.
Archie, indeed, discipline plays a significant role, but let's not underestimate the impact of environmental conditions, such as the Russian winter, and the psychological warfare waged by Russian forces, including the scorched earth policy. The enemy's refusal to engage in a decisive battle would have compounded the frustration and despair among French troops.
It's an intersection of all these factors: honor, psychological trauma, heroism, discipline, and environmental conditions that shape the soldiers' experiences. The respect for and adaptation to these hardships reflect both the valor and the vulnerability of the human spirit. And let's consider the resilience of the Russian soldiers, too, facing the invasion of their homeland. Their morale, bolstered by a defensive war, fighting for survival, presents a contrasting psychological dynamic to the invading forces.
True, Nadia. The psychological interplay between the invader and invaded is complex. The Russians' use of guerrilla tactics and the psychological impact of such a war of attrition cannot be understated.
It's worth mentioning, however, that the effectiveness of leadership in such dire times, on both sides, played a critical role in sustaining the troops' morale. Leadership failures had as much of a psychological impact as the horrors of the war itself.
Leadership, environment, discipline, not to forget the underlying ideologies driving both sides. The cohesive belief in one's cause has a profound effect on a soldier's willingness to endure unimaginable hardships.
Clearly, the psychological and moral impacts of this campaign were multifaceted, touching upon every aspect of human endurance, leadership, and the will to survive. Each of your perspectives underscores the complex nature of warfare and its enduring effects on those who live through it. Let's carry these insights into our next discussion on the retreat from Moscow. We now turn our focus to the harrowing retreat from Moscow, a pivotal moment that led to the downfall of the Grande Armée. Let's unearth the key factors and decisions during this critical phase. Archie, your insights on the logistical nightmare would be a great starting point.
Indeed, the logistics of withdrawing such a massive force from Moscow were nightmarish. Napoleon's decision to retreat along the same devastated route they'd advanced through only compounded their suffering. The supply shortage was catastrophic.
The human cost of that decision cannot be overstated. Frostbite, starvation, and disease decimated the ranks. However, it's critical to recognize the role of leadership decisions in exacerbating these conditions. The failure to secure a more viable retreat path was a monumental oversight.
While the point about leadership is valid, we must not overlook the relentless Russian pursuit. Kutuzov's strategy to harass and engage the French indirectly contributed significantly to the breakdown of their discipline and morale. It wasn't just the cold.
Jacob, you've highlighted a crucial aspect. However, Nadia brings up an excellent point about leadership failure. Innovation in retreat strategies was desperately needed, akin to the innovative approaches we see in modern warfare. The reliance on outdated tactics in the face of unprecedented challenges was a severe misstep.
Respecting the terrain and weather, as we discussed earlier, is a principle not exclusive to any one culture or period. The samurai understood this well. Napoleon's underestimation of Russia's winter was a fundamental failure in adaptation and respect for nature's power.
Katsuro, while your point is well taken, the significant difference here is the scale and logistical complexity of the Grande Armée. The strategic blunders, however, were indeed a result of failing to anticipate and adapt to those conditions.
Exactly, Archie. And it's worth pointing out the impact of these decisions on the soldiers. The grand strategic errors translate into personal suffering and loss on an unimaginable scale. That resonance of leadership failure is something we see tragically repeated through history.
Speaking of adaptation, it's a shame that the hardships experienced didn't lead to immediate innovations in military logistics and strategy. The lessons seemed learned too late for too many.
Nonetheless, the resilience displayed by the surviving members of the Grande Armée is noteworthy. Amidst all strategic and tactical failures, the will to survive and uphold some semblance of order was remarkable.
The retreat from Moscow serves as a stark lesson in the importance of adaptable leadership, the sheer force of nature, and the incomparable value of human resilience. These insights offer profound lessons for both military leaders and strategists today. Thank you all for a compelling discussion on this critical turning point in the 1812 campaign. Let's delve into the diplomatic implications of the French invasion on the European geopolitical landscape. Bill, could you share your insights on how this shaped power dynamics in Europe?
Absolutely, Alethea. The failure of Napoleon in Russia was a turning point. It significantly weakened the French Empire's dominant position in Europe, leading to the formation of the Sixth Coalition. Napoleon's ambition overreached, and this campaign exposed his vulnerabilities, emboldening his enemies.
I must add, viewing from a non-European lens, the reverberations were felt far beyond. The invasion demonstrated the limits of expansionism and influenced how other nations, including Japan, perceived European powers. It's a testament to the interconnectedness of global power dynamics.
I'll concede, Katsuro makes a good point about global perception. However, focusing on Europe, the most immediate effect was indeed on Britain. The campaign's failure bolstered the British morale and position, leading to increased support for the coalition against Napoleon. This shift cannot be understated.
Archie, while I agree with you on the British point, I think it's critical to underline the power vacuum Napoleon's retreat created. It allowed Russia to assert more influence in Eastern Europe, reshaping the balance of power. This was not just a failure, but a catalyst for a new European order.
And let's not overlook the diplomatic genius behind the coalition building post-invasion. The diplomatic isolation Napoleon faced was unprecedented. His former allies turned against him, proving that military might can't substitute for stable diplomatic relations. This set a precedent for diplomacy in Europe.
While the points on diplomacy and the balance of power are valid, we must remember the human cost that led to these shifts. The invasion and its aftermath directly affected the perception and implementation of military campaigns. It's a somber backdrop to these diplomatic maneuvers.
Exactly, Jacob. The losses were a stark reminder of the fragility of empires. The diplomatic changes were not merely political chess moves, but had profound impacts on the nations and people involved. Napoleon's failure was a lesson in humility for all empires.
This discussion highlights how interconnected military campaigns are with diplomatic outcomes. The French invasion of Russia wasn't merely a military debacle. It was a geopolitical earthquake that reshaped Europe and influenced international relations for years to come. Your insights have been invaluable in understanding the complexity of these implications. We've explored various dimensions so far. Let's pivot to the lessons learned from the 1812 campaign that have influenced future military strategy and doctrine. Jacob, your perspective on traditional military strategy is invaluable here.
The 1812 campaign, disastrous as it was for Napoleon, became a master class in the fundamentals of military logistics and the limits of offensive warfare. The primary lesson here is the critical importance of supply lines. Napoleon, for all his genius, stretched his army too thin, a mistake that military leaders since have studied to avoid.
While I agree on the importance of logistics, the innovation aspect cannot be overlooked. The campaign's failure sparked military and technological advancements. The use of resources, understanding terrain, and climatic conditions in planning operations have all seen significant evolutions, partly thanks to the hard lessons learned during Napoleon's Russian debacle.
Both valid points, but let's not forget the human aspect. The sheer human cost of the campaign taught future military leaders to strategize with a bit more caution regarding the welfare of their soldiers. The psychological impact of such campaigns has led to more comprehensive support systems for military personnel, addressing not just physical, but mental health as well.
Honor and duty drove soldiers of that era, but today we see those concepts evolving. The lesson of personal sacrifice and collective duty remains, yet how we support and honor our troops has changed. Understanding and leadership have advanced since then, reflecting a deeper respect for the individual soldier's value beyond mere numbers.
You're bringing modern sensibilities to a historical discussion, which is anachronistic. The real tactical lesson learned was the importance of preparing for all contingencies, something Napoleon failed at. Weather and geography, pivotal factors in his downfall, are now primary considerations in military strategy, teaching us that arrogance can be a leader's greatest enemy.
That's a harsh interpretation, Archie, yet understandable. Innovation sprouts from the soil of failure, after all. The use of intelligence and reconnaissance, understanding and anticipating enemy movements, leveraging technological advancements, these were all highlighted by Napoleon's campaign and have been refined ever since.
I must interject, Bill. Intelligence was always a part of warfare. Napoleon himself was a master strategist. However, the campaign underlines the fallibility of relying on past successes to guarantee future victories. Adaptability, then, emerges as a key lesson, reinforcing the value of evolving strategies in response to changing circumstances.
Adaptability, yes, but also the importance of understanding the human element. Modern military leadership places an emphasis on psychology, morale, and the well-being of soldiers. Napoleon's failures have underscored the need for a holistic approach to leadership that balances strategy with empathy.
And let's not overlook the impact on civilians, a lesson that has become increasingly crucial in modern warfare. The French invasion of Russia demonstrated the devastating effect on non-combatants, a factor that's now a fundamental consideration in planning and conducting military operations.
Indeed, the campaign has offered enduring lessons, from logistics and strategy to the moral and psychological considerations of warfare. These lessons resonate through military doctrine even today, reflecting the complexity of modern warfare and the continued relevance of history in shaping the future. Thank you all for a robust discussion. As we draw our discussion to a close, let's reflect on the profound impacts of the French invasion of Russia on military strategy, human psychology, and geopolitical landscapes. Let's hear your concluding thoughts, starting with you, Jacob.
The 1812 campaign, in my view, stands as a testament to the limitations of military power when stretched too far from its base. Napoleon, for all his genius, faltered not just on the Russian winter, but on the arrogance of extending logistics beyond their breaking point. This is a lesson in humility and strategic planning that military leaders today would do well to remember.
I must jump in here. While Jacob's assessment of the logistical nightmare is spot on, the innovation that Napoleon brought to military campaigns cannot be ignored. The use of corps system, for example, influenced modern military tactics. The failure was monumental, yes, but so were the sparks of innovation that came from adapting to those failures.
Both valid points, but let's not overlook the human aspect. The psychological toll of this campaign was immense. It showcases the dark side of grand ambitions, the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives, the suffering of soldiers exposed to unimaginable conditions. Modern military leaders must balance ambition with the welfare of their troops, acknowledging that the scars of war aren't always physical.
Your point about psychological welfare resonates deeply with the samurai philosophy, where the well-being of the warrior is as crucial as the strategic objectives. However, honor and duty dominated the psyche of those involved in the 1812 invasion, sometimes to their detriment. The sense of duty drives one forward, but the loss and devastation question the very core of such honor. Is it truly honorable to lead so many to their doom for the sake of expansion and ambition?
That's an idealistic view, Katsuro, but we must not forget the brutal reality of war. The Russian campaign is a prime example of the effectiveness and moral ambiguity of scorched earth policy. It may have been devastating, but it was strategically effective. It's a stark reminder that in war, moral compromises are often made in the name of victory or survival.
Your insights have been illuminating. The French invasion of Russia, a pivotal moment in history, has indeed offered us enduring lessons on strategy, humanity, and leadership. As we close, let us remember that the past, with all its complexity and tragedy, continues to inform the future. We must tread carefully, learn diligently, and lead wisely. Thank you, panelists, for a thought-provoking discussion. Your expertise and perspectives have enriched this conversation immensely.